Welcome to On the Real Side. I'm Bob Mover, and we thank you for tuning in to us. And a very distinguished guest today. I'm someone whose music I was not that familiar with, but I really am glad I kind of checked her out this week. I almost called her and said, I need another week because you're so prolific that I didn't really have time to check out all of the things that I wanted to. But I'm busy, these days myself too. But I will get to more of her. But I'm very happy to have with us today Ms. Jane Ira Bloom, a very fine soprano saxophonist and educator at the New School, among other places. And hi, Jane.
Hey, Bob. It's nice to be here with you.
It's nice to have you. We have some things in common that we are both, well, at least native Bostonians. Um, you, I was born actually in Brookline at, I think, Beth Israel Hospital, and grew up until my parents lost their money, and we moved to Florida, which people think is very funny that I grew up as a poor kid on Miami Beach, which is kind of strange. But we grew up in Swampscott for a while. What part were you right in Boston, or were you in a suburb, or
In the suburbs, yeah, of Newton, Massachusetts.
Newton? Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, Newton is nice.
hmm
I used to go visit Gunther Schuller
that's right.
in Newton when Ed was in high school.
hmm
I was hanging out at New England Conservatory, hanging out with Jackie Byard, and I moved into the dorm to live there without going to school there. And Gunther, instead of throwing me out, welcomed me. Said, "Sure, make yourself at home." And I used to go over and spend, the weekend over there, tutoring Ed and hanging out, because we would play together.
hmm
I was I was 19 and he was like 17 or 16.
hmm
And people laugh. I said, "Yeah, Gunther Schuller used to pick me up at the train station." And,
That's quite an illustrious chauffeur you had there.
right? That's what I mean. I had that. Oh yeah. Oh, I knew Gunther. He used to pick me up at the train station. But he was a very nice guy. I liked him a lot. He was a sweet cat. And Newton was a nice place. Also with Steve Schwartz, my old friend who was the radio WGBH, was also in Newton. So your family was, you said it was a musically friendly family, but not necessarily.
Yeah,
You
right.
could elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, in fact, my whole family's from New York City, Bob.
Okay.
All grew up in New York City, and when just before I think it was like around 1950, something like that, they moved out of New York, into Massachusetts. Uh, but it's so interesting. I was only in Massachusetts up until my teen year, through, high school. And then right after that, off to college, and then immediately went right back to New York City. So
Yeah.
in fact, I'm back in my roots, to be honest.
Well, I went to Boston for a little while when I was about 28. I went to live in New York. I live in Boston because I was having too good a time in New York
hmm
and was afraid I was having such a good time I might not make 30. So I went to Boston to think, and I ended up teaching at Berkeley for 3 semesters
hmm
until Chet Baker called me and said, "Don't you think you're a little young to be out to pasture?" And he
Interesting.
brought me to
Interesting.
Europe with him again. And but I never really, I mean, even though it's a great city for academia and for a lot of things, I never felt right in Boston. I never,
hmm
I just never really liked the place, frankly. I mean,
Okay. Okay.
I was there the year that someone randomly shot into a huddle. I don't know if you remember that. There was a football game between a heavily kind of Boston Irish kind of team and a black team
Mm-hmm.
from Dorchester, Roxbury, and somebody had randomly shot into the black huddle and killed a kid.
Oh, geez.
And that was like in 1980, I think. and the city, people were afraid the city was going to go up in flames. But fortunately,
Mhm.
they cooled it out. But that's kind of something I always. Boston is the only place I got beaten up
Oh,
for being a white guy walking down the street. I had a student who was a black girl who was studied with me, a singer, and I was, her teacher, and I would walk her to the subway. I was in Brookline, so we're not talking about living in.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, I lived in a nice place, near
Hmm.
Coolidge Corner.
Hmm.
So I'm there, and I would typically take her because she was a slight girl. I'd walk her over to the subway, put her on the subway, and go back home.
Hmm.
And I'm there, and these guys got out of the car, and they kicked us and beat us,
Oh
and
dear. Oh dear.
and this wasn't Mississippi, it was Boston, and anyway, so um, though there are many good things to be said for Boston, but
That's
um,
a rough memory to
it is a
to
rough memory
come to terms with.
to come to terms with. But
Mhm.
so you really you went to Connecticut. I mean, you are a Yale graduate.
Yeah, I was spent 5 years in New Haven, and then right after that, New York City.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
I guess you had just come to New York. Well, let's go to how did you start to play music when you were young? Did you play other instruments before saxophone, or did you?
Yeah, yeah,
What's the
piano,
story?
piano. Yeah, I studied piano, and a little bit after I started when I was very young. Like in third grade. Playing
Uh-huh.
saxophone, and shortly after that, I took up drums too.
Yeah,
And all in the public school system. And then, lucky me, because I lived outside of Boston, I guess they realized I was serious about the saxophone thing. And a friend of my father's, who was a music teacher, said, if you're studying saxophone, you got to study with this guy, Joe Viola.
oh yeah, yeah. I read about that. Your father was actually a music teacher then?
No, no, my father was not. No, his friend
Oh,
was, though. His friend,
his friend was. I got you. Yeah, yeah.
it was a music educator, and he was the one. You got to meet this Joe Viola. And so, at the tender age of, I don't know, I was in ninth grade or something.
Yeah.
I don't know how old I was, 12 or 13 years old. I
Oh,
hopped on the subway and went into Boston to meet one of the finest saxophone teachers the world has ever known.
he certainly was that. I read that you were playing alto, and that's was really Joe really gave you the impetus to take up the soprano. There was
Well, I was playing, alto, and I'd play soprano too. And often when we'd play duets, Bob, he'd pull out the soprano, and I liked what he was doing.
uh,
I liked what he was doing, so I said, I like that instrument.
uh, yeah, he got beautiful sound, on his instruments.
Yeah, so that's the original impulse was right there, listening to the sound of Joe Viola.
Yeah, well, I got to know Joe in the 3 semesters that I taught at Berkeley.
Sure.
Um, Joe, he had come to one of my gigs one night at Michael's. He showed up there, and I would drop in. He wasn't too far. His classroom was not far from mine,
Mhm.
and sometimes he'd be on a break, and I'd just go in and hang with him, and we'd talk,
Sure.
talk music and talk life.
Hmm.
And one of a big honor one night for me was when at the club Sandy's in Beverly, a guy named Sandy Berman had a club, and he hired me to play the Monday or Tuesday following the 4th of July. If you want to see empty club, um, get a gig on the 5th of July somewhere. And so there were only 4 people. I'll never forget that. The audience consisted of 4 people. My Uncle Carl and his wife Dorothy from Marblehead had come in to hear me, and Joe Viola and his wife
Hmm.
was the
Hmm.
other two
Yeah,
people.
they live north of Boston, right?
Yeah, in the North Shore there. And and they stayed the whole night and listened to us. And I thought that was I was very honored that Joe
Sure.
was there.
I have a memory now. Sandy's, did they sometimes pull in, they'd bring in musicians from like New York and stuff?
Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
got Chet Baker a gig there, and
I think I remember Toots Thielman.
yes, he
Toot,
played there.
I remember coming. there to meet with Toots at that club. I think I remember that.
Yeah, he did. He played there. Zoot would play there.
Uh-huh.
They had different. Sandy was a big lover of the music. You know, he was
Hmm.
like, you know, the old style club owner. There were a few of them
Yeah.
that actually really, you know, weren't just in it to get money. They were, in fact, they lost money a lot
Hmm.
because they loved the music so much. You know, that was another
Yeah.
uh, before everybody was commercial.
There was a Holiday Inn in New Haven that was like that too. They used to bring in. I'd hear Zoot Sims, Charles McPherson. I'd hear all kinds of great players in this little Holiday Inn, you know, Lee
Yeah,
Konitz and stuff.
yeah, there was a club in Providence too called Allery's that
Mhm.
used to bring in some people. I played there, but other people, you know, it was like it seemed like there were these little outposts,
Exactly,
you know,
exactly.
and
Yeah,
you had that kind of thing. And Sandy's was one of them, you know.
it's funny. I
And,
hadn't thought about that in ages, but I do remember that name, Sandy's. Yeah, that was where Toots played.
yeah, that was, and you know, there was also a club actually in Worcester called the El Morocco,
Hmm.
and there was like that was your Boston tour. If you got someplace, one major club in Boston like Lulu White's or some you know club on the circuit,
Hmm.
and then the two clubs that you did on the off nights
Hmm.
were Sandy's and the El Morocco. Like El Morocco was like open on Monday, which no club was, so that was part of your tour, you know. So you would
I
play
see.
there,
Yeah.
and you know that was actually you could play in the United States and find these places all over at that time, which you'd be hard put to find that, you know,
No,
now.
I remember those little places because that's where I got to hear everybody live. You know,
Yeah, there was,
when you're learning and you want to go hear people and hear them up close and personal. You know.
yeah, and I was fortunate enough to be the last generation that actually played those places.
Right.
You know, you would get there, and in fact, I heard George Coleman
Hmm.
at Allery's
Sure.
one time. I sat in with George there, and he called rhythm in D flat, and 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 after that, every time I'd see him in New York, and he'd introduce me to people as this is Bob Mover. He can play rhythm in D flat.
George liked to play all the funny keys.
He did, didn't he? You know, now you studied a little bit with him.
I sure did. And when I first got to New York, George I was studying with him at the time, and he was very kind. He'd invite me to come and I'd play with his octet sometimes, and he was he spent some time inviting me to be part of that, to see that world. He wanted to show me that world.
Wow.
So I have really fond memories of that time with him, and you have to imagine what it looked like to see me standing next to George Coleman on stage. This guy's as big as like a linebacker, and I'm up to about his belt buckle.
You are somewhat diminutive. I mean, nobody could probably tell that seeing her sitting down, but Jane is not a tall girl.
No, no,
But
not tall, not tall.
actually, you sound like you might be.
That's
You've got a
good.
big saxophone sound, you know. And I said I was
People,
surprised that you're.
people when I would go, playing around and they would see the albums and the album cover say, "Yeah, you look much taller on the album."
Yeah, that's funny. When I met you, I was thinking, well, you sound taller,
Yeah, that's good.
you know,
That's good.
and you know, because well, I could see, you know, you've got beautiful saxophone technique in a certain, you know, in a good way. That I can help. You can really play the horn. That was the first thing I heard about you is that you really could. One of the first things I heard of you, and I wondered other, you know, influences. I mean, I definitely hear Ornette in you. I like this record you did. Um, oh, it's with Charlie Hayden and Blackwell.
Oh, Mighty Lights, yeah. Yeah.
And there's one tune where you do this thing with a repeated note that I really like.
Oh, Mighty Lights.
Mighty Light. I think that's a beautiful performance, and
Well,
you know,
thank you.
it's sort of it's kind of coming from Prez in a weird way. It's like Prez and Ornette, you know, though I'm sure you weren't thinking about last year, but the repeated note really gets me, and I like the way the whole thing kind of falls together. Like that record date, was that Arabesque or was that your own label?
No, that was Enja Records. That was Matthias
Oh,
Winkelmann at Enja, who gave me
Matthias.
the opportunity to have my breakout, album on a verified jazz label that, that wasn't my own. And he said to me, Bob, who would you like to be? Who would you like in your rhythm section? And I was just aiming high. The best rhythm section I
Well,
could think of was Charlie Hayden, Ed Blackwell. And I had just finished listening to Fred Hirsch. I'd been down to Bradley's listening to Fred Hirsch play some duets with Charlie Hayden. I says, I like that. I like that piano player. I want him.
and that's how you got with Fred. Is that how you guys met?
I can't remember exactly how Fred and I met, but
But I mean, met, but musically met.
musically, yeah, yeah. We've been friends for a long time. Yeah, long time.
Yeah, and I mean, you have a nice, at least one duet record that I know of that's a very interesting record called As One.
Absolutely, and many, many, many other recordings where Fred assisted in playing my music and bringing it to life in very, very
Well,
miraculous ways.
another thing that you and I share in common is we have musically long relationships with people,
Hmm.
with the same friends. I mean, that tend to. I play with a lot of different people, but there are people that you just have these friendships, and then after a while, you say, "Oh my, how when is when did we play? Oh, it's 40 years, man. Really, And I'm like, really that was, and the ones that lived, but I noticed that, including, I mean, I might as well throw in your marriage. I never had that, but you have been married for a long time, over 50 years, right? With your, can
I
I?
haven't blah blah. No, no, yeah, no. Joe and I got married in 1984, I think 84.
Oh, 84. So
84, yeah,
okay, so it's 40 something years, but
yeah,
that's
yeah.
and he's an actor. I've seen him. I saw his picture there, and I mean, I know I remember him from Law and Order, among other things. Uh, and that's an interesting fact that you've been able to hold a
Yeah, I'm
relationship
I'm
together.
I met Joe, in the 1970s when I was at Yale at the Yale Repertory Theater. That's where we met.
Ah,
So, Joe is an actor and a director and film and theater actor. And I don't know, somehow I knew even then that a relationship with another performer, but not necessarily a musician, that would work out good.
uh-huh. Did you have any interest in theater yourself in doing something like that? Did you flirt with that idea, or were you always just about
No,
music?
me acting? No, no,
No, never.
no, never, no. I just appreciated theater.
Well, one thing though that with the acting thing, you and I, another thing that I think we kind of have is I, what I find interesting about you. One of the things is that you've got one side that's very um, free and very avant. I don't like terms and labelology. It's kind of a weird thing. But let's say, especially with your electronic stuff, that is right on the edge of being out of control. It's sort of like just really teasing us to see is it gonna break or not. And I like that too. And then you have another side that just loves ballads and melodies. And
Hmm.
it reminded me of something Lee Konitz used to say. This girl asked Lee one time just how she could feel better in social situations. She said to Lee, "You seem to be naturally shy, and I'm very naturally shy. And how do you get over your shyness?" And Lee said, "Well, I guess you got to say the secret would be to just be yourselves. And you have a number of personalities. There's, I think, and that's
Well,
interesting.
it's interesting you noticed it. No, there's no question. The American Songbook was something that's in my bones. It was in the air. I got it from listening to the recordings that were in my home. The albums and my mother's interest in music and the Ella Fitzgerald records and the musical theater. All that American Songbook is stuff that I feel in my bones because it's always been a part of me. So I never wanted to deny that. I'm a no question about that, that I'm a melodist.
Yeah, I mean that's I think we share that, and also just besides melodies, the love of those songbooks. Because I have a similar.
Hmm.
Like my mom was a singer, my dad was a trumpet player,
Hmm.
and my dad did not know the lyrics and used to bug my mother. How could you play those? And he was a very good ballad player, but still, he had an idea what the song was about,
Hmm.
but he didn't know My mother knew every lyric. You could say "In Love in Vain," and she knew every single word to it. It was just. And she told me once your technique and all that, that comes from your dad because your ability to practice for hours and hours and hours and this and that. But your soul, that comes from me, and your love of song. So, my brother said that, like, what I do, because I really think of lyrics. Like, I don't even want to play a ballad if I don't know the lyric to it.
Absolutely.
If I hadn't heard a vocal version of it, or at least, sung it by myself at the piano. I've lost my voice because I had a tracheostomy.
Ah.
You might see this because of my emphysema.
Hmm.
So I can still play,
Hmm.
but I can't. My larynx got repositioned in a way that I have now an octave, if I'm lucky. I
Hmm.
have an octave. If I'm lucky, you will tell me that you care.
You can
You will
sing in
never.
an octave. Yeah.
I'll be able to sing an octave. But anyway, my brother said that what I do is, and I think it's sort of like you too. When I was listening to your "I Loves You, Porgy," I thought was really beautiful, and "Lost in the Stars," and some of the ballads that you're playing. Um, my brother says it's like method playing, like the idea of method acting, because you're actually not so much playing the note as you're
The
playing the
words.
lyric.
You're playing the lyrics, right?
And I found that you're one of the few people that does that, and I'm one of the few people that does that because a lot of cats,
Hmm.
and I say cats, there are female cats as well, by the way. So I'm not being sexist when I say cats, but you know,
Well,
um,
for sure, listening to vocalists, and I mean deeply listening. Before I recorded Lost in the Stars, I was listening deeply to Abby Lincoln. There was no question in my mind, if you listen to Abby Lincoln and you hear what I was doing later, that she was inside me when I was playing that, and taught me those words. Or I loves you, Porgy. I can think of listening to the cast album actually.
yeah. The Ella Fitzgerald and Louis is a really nice version of that too, that I recall.
Beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
But
But
yeah, I mean,
you're
like there are
absolutely right.
tunes.
You're absolutely right about connecting to the lyric.
In fact, I did a few records where the producer um, insisted that I sing. I used to sing on gigs. I would sing maybe two tunes a set. And the reason I started to sing tunes on gigs was I realized that growing up, I didn't have to sing on the gig because my audiences were like 10 years older than me usually. So they all had grown up. If I was going to play, um, I'm not much to look at, nothing to see. Most of the audience knew somebody's like Billy's record of that or somebody's, but they
Hmm.
had those lyrics in their head.
Hmm.
So if I was playing that, I didn't have to sing it. But then a whole generation of all of a sudden younger people started to come and listen to me, and I realized that they don't know. They would ask me sometimes. They say, "Is that so? Did you write that?" Like, you play Stardust, and somebody says, "Did you write that?" and so I started to sing the lyrics, and now because of my voice, I can't I can't do that anymore. Probably make a couple of jazz critics happy, um, but I think that the respect that you have for the song and for the lyrics. And I read that you teach a class at the New School in ballad playing.
Boy, you've done your homework. I was just thinking about how, because you're talking about this. I teach a course at the new school called Art of the Ballad, and basically I'm trying to teach a younger generation of musicians how to play slow,
Yeah,
and how to connect back to the words, because they don't have them. They know those songs from looking at the real book through their eyes, but they don't know it through their ears, and they don't know it what the song is about, because they can't
yeah,
remember the lyric. They don't. hear the meaning of the song, the lyrics.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's what drives. Uh, I get upset at that too. And I mean, my students are not allowed to learn songs from the real book, actually at all. I go as far as even the chord changes. That you better sense what progression is going on, at a certain level.
Hmm.
But just the whole idea. What kills me too is when somebody's reading the changes, and you're playing. I'll remember April or something, and there's like six people. This is when I had a class at Berkeley. I remember doing this. There's four horn players and a rhythm section. So you're playing approximately 12 choruses of the song. Let's say if you've got four soloists playing two choruses each, and a melody in and a melody out, it's somewhere around a dozen times you're playing the song. And you're watching the piano player and the bass player looking at the changes after six choruses, like they're going to disappear, or they're suddenly going to be, rather than thinking what sort of substitutions they might use and just using it as a guide, you have to like tell people that there's that, and that you have to listen to, um, listen to Sinatra's version of everything.
Hmm.
If you want some
Absolutely.
basic thing,
You want to learn about phrasing? Absolutely.
and in fact, I found that what I do to students sometimes, my mother used to do this because she would teach vocalists sometimes. You would just have people like snap the pocket, and say like, "I'm not much to look at, nothing to see. Just glad I'm living and lucky to be. Tell me the story with the lyrics,
Hmm.
and then play it."
Right. No, that's a great acting coaching technique. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I mean, we share that, and then it's interesting to get totally away from that world and into like a kind of just free of almost tonality, and on the borders, which you go there too. So I find that's interesting that you have gone to those, uh, find a way to
Well,
unite those extreme aspects of your apparently disparate personality traits or something like that.
well, it's it all gets wrapped up into me. Basically, Bob, I'm a person who's interested in ideas. All what you hear, all the compositional influences that are in the tunes and things are often coming from inspiration from outside the world of music into it, or the world of world music or contemporary music. And and as far as what I do as a player, I mean, you've nailed it. I'm a line player. I love melodic line and pitch and making a sound on the instrument. And I've invested, even when I use the electronics, in trying to imbue so much of what I do with the love of the sound. That even when I'm combining these basically analog electronic sounds, I'm still very much interested in the timbre and the breath of the saxophone. It's what I've spent my life, creating a sound on. And so everything about, I think, what I do, whether it's in a traditional ballad context or whether it's more free floating lines and things, I'm still just very interested in making melodic lines in interesting ways. I can't help
Yeah,
it. That's who I am.
yeah, I think that's a wonderful thing,
Yeah.
about you, because it gives you some kind of roots that you're connected to something. Because without that, you're just it's like there's freedom and there's anarchy. And I really like freedom, and I'm not sure about anarchy, but I don't think I like it. But there you go on the border of it sometimes. And I used to hang out with Paul Bley. He's my daughter's godfather,
Sure.
and he would say, he would encourage me to, because he would encourage me to play free and get into that world. He said, you know so much about songs. Now just play the song without the song.
Well, that's what he did with Ornette,
Yeah,
Absolutely.
just play a song without the song. Just make it up. So I was, do that. Now, when you talk about outside influences, I'm going to get really outside for a second and talk about your involvement. You actually with outer space, and you have actually had a oh, an
Oh, the ast-
asteroid. No, what do they call it?
yeah, an asteroid.
Asteroid named named for you. You are uh, 6083
5083, right? Jane Ira Bloom.
5083,
Jane Ira Bloom is out there.
give or take. Yeah, right. Give or take 1,000. Um, so how did this how did that come?
Okay, I'll tell you this story. At the time, I was involved with NASA. I got a commission from NASA to write music for
How
their
did
art
that happen?
program.
Did you apply for a grant, or
No,
they,
no,
they liked your
it's a
version of Lost in
no,
the
it's a
Stars?
story. It's a story you wouldn't believe. It was in the early '80s, and things weren't going so great in my career at the time. And a very good friend of my husband's and a very dear friend of mine, actor by the name of Brian Dennehy.
I love Brian Dennehy.
And Brian says to
Oh,
me,
he's
we were out one
great.
night. I says, Brian, things aren't going so good. And Brian says to me, well, what are you interested in? And I says, well, I've always been interested in the space. I've watched every launch, and ever since Alan Shepard went up, I watched everything. I just was always fascinated. He says,
Sure.
well, why don't you write a letter to NASA? I says, what do you mean? He said, just write a, tell them you're interested. So I guess things were just rough enough, Bob, that I sat down and I actually wrote a letter, a message in a bottle. I wrote a letter to NASA
That's funny. That's
inquiring about whether they'd ever done any research on the future of the arts in space. I was interested in what music in zero G might be like.
sure.
And much to my surprise, 6 months later, I get this letter back from a gentleman who was at the time he was the head of something called the NASA Art Program, a commissioning program at NASA that commissioned visual artists.
Who
Uh,
would even thunk they had
They did.
that?
They still do. And very famous artists too. Rauschenberg and very serious artists. They would invite down to NASA to see what was the facility, and then they would make a work of art that inspired them. And
Oh,
anyway, Bob Schulman, who was head of NASA art program, turns out he was a jazz fan, and he started up a correspondence with me. And he'd send me all these press releases, stuff from NASA, and I'd write these things about what I was interested in. And over this correspondence, Bob, I said, you know, how about commissioning a musician for the first time? And much to my surprise, he thought that was a great idea, and the rest is history. So I
wow.
became the first musician who was commissioned by NASA.
And you wrote a few pieces for them, right? Wasn't there a ballet or something, or
Well, I wrote a piece for chamber orchestra,
that's
jazz musicians inside the orchestra, and surround sound speaker system, which we premiered at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
yeah. I saw that you won a Grammy for a surround sound record.
Well, that was
And
the
I don't
start of
know
it.
what surround sound. I'll betray my ignorance here. What could you explain to us? What is surround sound exactly?
Hearing sound coming at your ears from all direct, 360-degree listening experience from the front, the back, the top, the side. It comes at you from all over.
And is it like one or two speakers that do this, and it projects the
Well,
sound that way, or how is that done?
usually there's a whole satellite system of speakers. Like when
That's
you go to the movies, Bob, when you go to the movies and you hear sound coming at you from behind you and in front of you, that's an immersive sound uh, algorithm that's at play there. And I got, starting from this NASA experience, got very interested in how sound changes when it moves and how you could. Now I'm very involved in working with audio engineers who are quite proficient in this world of surround sound, immersive sound, they call it now. Jim Anderson and Ulrika Schwartz, who are these amazing, amazing engineers who I've worked with intimately now for many, many years to record projects that I think about the music, what would be best recorded in surround sound, not just any music.
What, how do you determine that, and what have you determined does work best?
Well, it's been a learning It's very intuitive. My approach has been very intuitive, Bob. I've found, and you can appreciate this, is that sometimes some of the best musical choices that work in surround sound are the most simple musical choices. In other words,
Well, exactly.
less complex, you know, virtuosity with the notes, but more pointed focus on the strength of the ones that you choose.
Huh.
I think it's because perceptually a lot is going on when we're listening to sound coming at us from different directions, as opposed to just from the front, or stereo. There's more mentally going on, I think.
So, like, have you done it with, what's the largest ensemble you've worked with that way, and the smallest? I mean, what size of ensemble, and how does the material determine? Does it have harmonic?
Yeah, absolutely, it
Or,
can. Absolutely, this is not dumbing down the music at all.
no, no, no. I'm
Yeah,
just
yeah,
wondering.
yeah. But the largest ensemble that I was thinking that I wrote for with this surround sounds in mind was a 32-piece wind ensemble I wrote for with jazz musicians, and then a piece I wrote for orchestra for the American Composers Orchestra that we premiered in Carnegie Hall with brass players in the balconies.
Wow.
Standing, the trombones and the French horns were in the high balconies in Carnegie. That's something I'll never forget.
That wouldn't. Yeah, that'd be hard to forget.
And on the reverse side of that, the albums uh, that the one that received the Grammy Award was a jazz trio, saxophone, bass, and drums. And then we got a Grammy nom for another project that I did with Jim Anderson and Ulrika Schwartz called uh, what's the matter with me? uh, uh, I'm blanking on the name of my own album.
Yeah.
Picturing the Invisible, Focus One,
Oh,
and a series of duets of myself and bass, myself, drummer Allison Miller, and percussionist Allison Miller, and myself playing duets with a koto player, Mia Maselka, uh, which got a Grammy nom, immersive sound, like, whoa. And
wow.
that was just as spare as can be.
Right. So you were like the shakuhachi part.
Exactly. You
Yeah,
you nailed it. Absolutely. I was the shakuhachi to Mia's koto.
right. Yeah, yeah. I could hear that. I had a funny shakuhachi story. A friend of mine, I was, in my early 20s. I had that bell ringing in the empty sky record.
Me too. I have that album.
Yeah, it had that tune, Rokudan.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Dee do da da do dee dee da do dee da. And I used to kind of play along with it, and everything. And I liked it so much. So a friend of mine, my first uh, my first wife, that's what they call it. Yes, that's what that relationship is called. Was Japanese, was Brazilian, but she worked for a Japanese company, and she was her parents were Japanese, and she worked for a Japanese travel agency, and so she had someone bring her back a really nice shakuhachi from Japan, a beautiful one, and she gave it to me as a gift.
Mm.
So I had my shakuhachi, and I'm trying to practice my shakuhachi, and it's really true what they say. It's hard to get a sound out of it, especially if you're not a flute player of any kind. I'm using the saxophone, and whatever I'm doing, I'm not doing it right, Jane. I can't get anything out of this thing.
Oh, you need a sensei, Bob. You need a
I do
shakuhachi
need,
sensei.
yeah, I need that, and it's not. I'm not having it. This and that. So a buddy of mine showed up one day. I worked at it for about maybe a better part of a year, a few times a week. I don't say I practiced diligently. I was playing 7, 8 hours of saxophone a day and working, so I didn't have a lot of time for. But I tried it, and my buddy came over. He was a clarinet player, classical clarinet player, and he sees the shakuhachi on the bed. He says, "Oh, is that a shakuhachi?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I've always wanted to try one of those." And he picks up the shakuhachi and he plays it. He got a nice sound and he got something out of it. So I did the Zen thing to do, Jane. I gave him the shakuhachi.
Oh, good for you.
I said, "You did it. Here, it's yours." But yeah. So anyway, you made a record with the koto. That's I'd love to hear that. That's really nice.
Yeah.
Um, so that's the other thing. You've done a lot of experimenting with sound. When I first saw you play, you whisked your horn around in the air, and I said to myself, I don't think she's really into showbiz.
No.
In other words, I mean, you
No.
didn't seem like the type that was like, all of a sudden, you're turning your horn in the air. And I'm saying, I've got to ask her, like, what was I guess we're still talking about aerodynamics and that type of thing and your interest in sound.
Yeah.
So, how does that relate when did you start to do that? And what made you do it? And what do you get from it?
Well, I always moved when I played, Bob. It was just intuitive. I wasn't, no, I'm not an entertainer, a showman at all. But I always felt something in my body when I played, and I wasn't afraid to express it. And it was actually working with dancers and choreographers who made me more aware of it and how if I became more conscious of it, that it was very interesting how sound can change when it moves. And so I got very interested in this Doppler-like effect. In a simple way, with the velocity that you can move the bell of the horn past some microphones, and you can hear a slight, you know, uh, dip in pitch. And then I started using these electronics, live electronics I was using to kind of amplify it a little bit. That's what you hear it on some of the albums. Basically, it's me, swinging the horn at different speeds across a microphone field to try to see if you could feel sound moving in space, not unlike the way Jackson Pollock would throw the paint on a canvas.
Well, does it pick up some feedback that way? Is that what it kind of? Is there any kind of feedback that gets picked up as you swing the horn? I'm just.
It's not a feedback, but you can hear the velocity. You can feel the pitch dip.
Huh.
Yeah, you could hear it. And frankly, the only person it never bothered him, but I used to watch Sonny Rollins moving the horn all the time, all over the place. Didn't bother him a bit.
Yeah, no, Sonny does that. He,
Yeah, he just feels free. He's just free.
yes, excuse me. Yeah, he does. That's true, and and the walking. One of the things I do with my students, a guy came to me a while back, and he was he played stiff. He just didn't really swing, and like he was stiff, and his shoulders were all tense. And he had an okay sound. It wasn't a bad sound. He played for a while, and I said to him, maybe you should dance with your horn. Like in other words, like you never really played for dancing, so like so think about your horn, and just as you play,
Mhm.
whether you do it in public or not, but when you practice, I want you to dance. And he said it freed him up. Like all of a sudden,
Right.
played better, and he was just
Either that or you could introduce him to a dancer who could just partner with him and he could feel it.
that could be good too.
Yeah, I mean that they know what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, I just felt he should just feel the movement of
Yeah,
emotion.
sure.
Now that's another thing you've done with sound. That I was reading a story, a little thing about that during the pandemic. Um, when we couldn't play with people, that was I know a big, big problem in that period. You started to play in a remote way. First, you and just Mark Elias, that's how he pronounces it,
Yeah, yeah.
Mark Elias, and you would. How would you do that? One of you would record, and the other one would listen to it and play on top of that
No,
separately.
no, no. We played in real time, Bob. We played in real time with each other, and it's really kind of magical how it worked out, to be honest. I mean, because
Oh,
it shouldn't be that we were able to do that because there's a delay.
synchronization problem.
Yeah, a synchronization. And here's what we wound up doing. We would basically listen to each other using a program, I think it was called Sonobus, which allowed us to hear each other in something not in exact same time, but close. much closer than Zoom, for example, this Sonobus. So we would actually hear each other a little closer to hearing each other in real time than you and I would do in Zoom. However, we would each record separately. And I'd record the saxophone part on my end. Mark would. And before we would record, we'd do a clap test where we'd each try to clap in time with each other. And that would show us how far off the delay was. And what Mark would do is after we would just play, and somehow something magical just happens among improvisers who know each other. We started to play and we synchronized with one another, even though it sounds like it's impossible to have done that. We
Yeah, it
did.
does sound like it's
We
impossible.
did. Somehow we've known each other and played with each other for so long that we just did it. And then Mark would take the two files, the sax and the bass files, and he would line them up. And I'll be damned if it doesn't line up.
Huh. Now these were tunes with changes, or these were basically.
No, no, we were
That's
just
right, because I don't think you could play with changes that
it
way, right?
it was, yeah, you would have to do it very, abstractly, for sure.
Yeah.
However, he and I were improvising freely in the moment. We were making it up. We were just pulling it
Yeah.
out of the air. But yet we were playing in time. We were able to find harmonic cadences that we played with one another. I don't know how we did it, Bob. We did. It's there, it's documented.
Wow.
But all those things that are part of our regular in-person musical lives somehow found its way. Why? Because we had to. We wanted to play with each other so badly that something inside our musical unconscious adjusted. Go figure.
Yeah, yeah, I'm baffled. I mean,
We were baffled too, but we just went with it.
yeah, no, that's yeah, that makes I mean, if it works, it works. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth. I mean, if it's
Oh, he and I made 3 albums, and then another album. We did the same thing, with the sax and the bass, and then our trio partner, drummer Bobby Previtt, he took the the files that we did, and then he overdubbed a drum part as if he had been there post
huh.
production. But nobody could have just done that. He only could do that because the three of us have played as a trio for so long that we knew each other so well that he
Well,
could
his
do that.
part seems a little easier because I mean, just in the sense, that you already got the
I
other
don't
two
know
parts.
about easy, Bob,
Well,
but
I don't mean easy, but a little less. I mean, to make you and Mark sync,
yeah,
still try, to do that. And I'm
not
saying,
an easy thing. I don't know how he did it, but somehow he did. I
wow,
don't know. But it sure goes to show you, what is this amazing thing that improvisers do when they play with each other?
yeah, it is something. Um, just what I was wondering too, as far as mentors went, we didn't really talk about that too much. I mean, you definitely have your own way of playing and looking at things. I mean, I hear Ornette influence in you. I mean, I can hear some of that. And I was wondering who like were your favorites. Did you get to know Steve Lacy at all, or did you have?
No, no, I was far away from that world at the time. No, I didn't get to know Steve until much, much later. But interestingly enough, Bob, my influences come from places other than the soprano saxophone. They come mostly from trumpet players and vocalists.
Yeah, I mean, I could see
Booker
that.
Little, Kenny
Yeah,
Wheeler, Miles Davis. Um, on the vocal end, Abby Lincoln, Billie Holiday, you know, uh,
yeah. I mean, I have that too. I mean, I'm not just influenced by saxophone players. There's in fact, Sal Nistico was saying, "Oh, your soprano. Do you hear it as a do you hear it as a trumpet or an oboe or a clarinet? How do you hear it? And I was like, well, it's got all of that, all of
it's
those,
all of the above,
all
right?
of those. They're all in it. And but let's say musicians that you became friendly with in your development. Were there people that you kind of that influenced you or that mentored you? Older people besides Joe Viola? Did you have relationships like
Well,
that?
well, wherever I could find it, Toots Thielman was one, George Coleman was one. Uh, Interaction with Sonny Rollins, uh, just his inspiration. Uh,
Did you get to know Sonny at all?
yes, I did. I did, and I feel very lucky to have had some wonderful conversations with him.
Yeah, he likes
Ed,
to talk on the phone. I had wonderful,
yeah, right.
you know.
Ed Blackwell, I count as, again, it's not mentoring in the traditional sense of teacher, but oh, yes, a teacher. Ed
Yeah,
Blackwell and Charlie Hayden deeply influenced my thinking. And um, there's so many people. I'm forgetting things, but you know, always keeping my mind open to, to sounds that I liked.
yeah. I mean, I had the same thing. I mean, I never finished high school, but I had a lot of teachers,
Mhm.
but they were more like you're talking about. I spent hours with Sonny on the phone, and then going over and practicing with Lee Konitz and finally making a record with him and
Mhm.
doing those kind of things. But Jackie Byard, but none of it was really formal study. But I just bothered these people probably enough till they never threw me out. So, so I kept asking questions, hanging out with them, and that's how. Because you're still of that generation where that was a large
Still,
part of how you would
yeah, it was still possible. Yeah,
learn this
still,
music. Yeah,
it was still possible, and being up close and personal with the people who created this music was very, very important. Not to learn it just from records or books or from the people.
yeah, I found that too. That
Mhm.
was something that you.
You kind of understand a little bit more about why they play, not just what they play, but why they play.
Well, why they play? I mean, Lester Young said something very beautiful once. He said, "Jazz is an art, a science, and a philosophy," and it kind of covers. When you get to know those people, you can see that in their own ways, they're all covering it as all of those three things.
Yeah, great
Yeah,
thinkers, great imaginative spirits, above and beyond even their musical contributions. What was going on in their minds? It's like they're deeply thinking people.
yeah, that's true. I mean, they were really and thinking about a lot of things. I mean, Sonny was thinking about global warming before people were even talking about it. He'd be talking about the state of the planet and things like that. I remember Sonny bringing that up to me when I was just thinking about G7s, but he's talking about something beyond that. And yeah, I mean, so yeah, we're fortunate. Now you knew also we had some other mutual friends. Your first record was with you had Rufus Reed
Hmm.
uh,
With Rufus, sure.
on that with you, right?
On one on the nearness, absolutely. No, no, I count Rufus as a very dear friend. He was also involved in that NASA project, by the way. He was the bass player on it.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's too much.
Anyway, I should finish that story because we made an album of I wrote a bunch of music that was very much inspired by my thinking about deep space exploration and NASA. It was called Art and Aviation. To answer your earlier question, it turns out that astronomers, there was an astronomer at the Flagstaff Observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona, named Brian Skiff. And these guys, they stay up real late at night when they're doing their observing. Turned out he was a jazz fan. And
Oh,
and in the middle of the night, when he was observing one night, he was listening to this album of mine that Rufus is on called Art and Aviation. And that was when he discovered this asteroid. And when an astronomer discovers it, he's allowed to name it. And that's how it got named
that's
Asteroid
how
Jane
you.
Ira Bloom. That was the story.
Oh, that's great. Oh,
So thank you, Brian. And lucky that he was a jazz fan.
yeah. I mean, that's a beautiful story. He, yeah, and Rufus is another one. That's the one thing I miss about that. I think in these present days, when I notice young jazz musicians, our generation was not as codified. Like somebody like Rufus, for example, would be equally at home playing bebop with Dexter Gordon or playing some rather exploratory things.
Absolutely. And
And there was a whole generation of people that played that way, like Rahsaan Roland Kirk. It covered everything. It could go in and out and uh, be many ways. And a little bit more these days, people either play. I play traditional bebop oriented music, like try to play like 1955 or Blue Note records, which is wonderful when they happened, and or somebody I only play original stuff and I only play as a little far out or whatever it is, but it's not the kind of thing where we could kind of go in and out. You could play a beautiful ballad and then play something that was totally experimental or exploratory. And that was a natural way that we were playing because in one night, like in New York City in 1968, I remember hearing Bud Johnson and Archie Shepp on the same night.
wow.
I mean, you could hear Helen Humes, and and Marion Brown. I mean, and
Hmm.
she just went from club to club. It was different. So it's like I don't think there's that kind of thing anymore. Plus, it's so expensive. You couldn't just go from club to club and have one little drink at each club and not pay a cover and sit at the bar and absorb the music. So
Well,
I think that affects things.
in my experience, and I'm around a lot of young people because I've been, a teacher I've been teaching at the New School for Jazz and Contemporary Music, for almost 27 years now. I see a lot of young musicians, and you know, I think it's not as rigidly divided as you think. At least among the young people, there's a great hunger to have all of it and to get close to it. And sometimes they just don't know how, but having access to both to traditional information and to what you do with it in your own mind, creating your own musical universe, whatever that is, you know, uh, given the information from the tradition, I've found young people are pretty interested in it, a lot more than you'd think.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's good. I've
I'm heartened by it. I mean, I see a lot of openness, coming from them. And you're right that they want to define the music in their own way because hell, it's 2025. It's not 1955. So they're definitely trying to make their own spin on it, but they are still very interested in learning about where it comes from.
uh, well, I'm glad of that. There are also a couple of things I was thinking about. Another person that we had in common was I'm very sad at her passing was Jay Clayton,
Oh, yeah.
and Jay's on my very first record. She's was on that, and then we lost touch with each other, and uh, she kind of was not as recognized as she probably should have been. She kind of picked a spot in music that was kind of a hard place to
Well,
definitely one of the
t-
least
well,
commercial places.
well, talk about a person who had breadth and to her musical thinking. Absolutely, from a ballad to playing in the Steve Reich ensemble. Jay had enormously wide range that she used her instrument and the unique vocal instrument
Yeah,
to apply it to. And she was the first person she and Sheila Jordan were the first people I sat in and played with when I came to New York. George Coleman, Jay Clayton, and Sheila Jordan.
first people. That's an interesting place to start out.
Yeah, but it was a very long and wonderful collaborative, life that I had playing with Jay for a long time in all kinds of group settings, and also with the drummer and electroacoustic percussionist Jerry Grinelli, who sadly has also passed away.
Oh, I didn't realize. I heard it
Yeah.
with Ralph Towner one night. Abercrombie and I went over to Fat Tuesdays and heard. Ralph Towner and Peacock and Jerry Granelli,
Hmm.
which was quite a nice trio there.
So
And now your own record company, I was curious, you from a very early on in your career, you were your own, you started out as your own
1976.
producer. Yeah, so let me know about, I'd like to know about Outline Records, and then you went with Arabesque for a while. I know you made one for Enja, and I don't know if you did, was it Columbia too? No,
Yeah, two albums for CBS, which interestingly enough, Bob, after 35 years, they're finally re-releasing it next month.
there you
I
go.
can't believe it. I just got a call from Sony, authorization from Sony licensing the other day saying that they're finally releasing the second album that I made for Columbia called Slalom. Fred Hirsch is on it, Tom Rainey's on it, Kent
Oh,
McLagan's on it. It's some beautiful music that they're finally re-releasing.
well, better late than never. I'm getting
Yeah.
stuff released for the first time that's 35 years old.
Wow.
Because when I was coming up too, if you weren't with a major record company, um, they really didn't. You just didn't get it out there. Unless you went to a very small record company, and unless you had the energy to produce it yourself,
Yeah.
like you and Paul Bley did.
Yeah.
Then
And Carla Bley too. She was the one actually. The New Music Distribution Service in 1975, 76. Carla Bley shone the light to everybody how to do it.
really,
Yeah,
that's where that.
she was championing independent music, producer, record producing.
So that's before Bley. Paul came up with improvising artists. Then
Yeah, I don't know the exact timeline, Bob, but I know Carla was an influence to me. So, um, in 19 mid 1970s, I was coming out of college, 1976, 77. Nobody was putting out independent. There was nobody's, hiring young new jazz artists to go record on their companies. So it was no choice, Bob. You had to do it yourself. It was
yeah,
just
well,
you it was the only way to go. You start your own record company, you learn how to make in those days it was LPs. You just learn how to do it. I learned about it from at the time from Leo Wadada Leo Smith in
my
New
trumpet
Haven.
player, very.
And he was very much an inspiration to a whole community of musicians, showing them when you have important music to document, you just document it yourself. So you start your own record company, you start your own publishing company, and you learn how to make a record. That's what I did.
Well, that's that was to me that was ironic too because it was strange that the people that were really the better business people, I mean the people that were better at business, were often the cats that played the furthest out. I thought that was it was you know it was interesting. I did a tour with um Steve, I'm missing, not Steve McCall, the other Don Moyer.
Don Boyer, sure.
Yeah, I did this tour of playing rather free with a guy named um, Gianni Lenoci in Italy, and he hired Don Moyer and I to make this nice, kind of very free record. It was a really beautiful record, his compositions, and
Hmm.
I quite like it. And Don Moyer and I were on tour, and he was an incredibly good. He was always doing his business. He was like on the phone and making this call to do that, and this and that, and
That's an interesting observation. I never heard that before, but I'll think about that.
yeah, I thought that was funny because like from just one must not make prejudge things or make assumptions. That's one of those four agreements.
Well,
Don't make assumptions.
you just get very creative about how to make music as you do making the music.
Yeah, well, how to get it out there, and
Yeah.
now you've done that. Then I heard that later on, your record company was kind of inactive for a while you recorded for other companies, and then you bought your stuff back.
Yep, I bought it back from Arabesque, and then all I did, everything I record now, it's on my own dime. That's outline records.
Wow, who was Arabesque? I used the names. Was it Joel Chris? I couldn't remember who was associated.
His brother Danny Chris.
Danny Chris. Somehow my mind had
Yeah,
Joel in my mind. Yes.
yeah, I did a lot of wonderful projects for them, and I bought them back. They were beautiful projects we did.
Huh.
And so I now have control of them, which is great.
Well, it's been wonderful to talk to you. I've found out a lot. Maybe it'd be funny. I would be curious if we ever wanted to play duets remotely, because I don't leave my house because I'm a high risk
Right.
uh, because of my
Of course, yeah.
susceptibility, because of my condition. And man, I've turned all of a sudden now everybody wants me to play all over the world, and I can't go.
Well, there's some very sophisticated. You're gonna have to get yourself a really smart engineer, but there's some very good software now, with the assistance of an engineer, Bob, that you can play with people around the world in what is almost unquestionably like real time. I've been doing this for many years now, with a composer named Sarah Weaver, who's very experienced in this, playing with musicians live in real time in Korea, in Dubai, in Germany, in California, all at the same time. It's
Well, I've
extraordinary.
heard about those things. I'm doing a record now, actually, with strings and orchestra
Mm-hmm.
that my friend Isaac Raz arranged, and I've recorded my parts. I mean, I've been improvising and playing over the synthesized version of the orchestra, the charts, just from my living room. I don't leave this chair. I do it on the Steinberg machine, and the band is being recorded with one trumpet player is playing the trumpet parts, and it's an orchestra, and then we got somebody else with trombone, and three saxophone friends of mine are doing that, and I think Billy Hart's going to play drums, and everybody's recording from either Isaac's studio or their own house, where
Right,
everybody has these home recording setups. So they
right,
take their parts, and
right, and that's layering. That's like layering tracks.
that's
But you're
layering. But
right.
I'm curious to play actually in real
No,
time.
you can do it in real time, which is what you normally do. You know,
Right. If you could tell me how to do that, because I've
I don't
heard
know
a
if I could tell
couple of,
you, but yeah, there are
not you, but
engineers that could.
yeah, I mean, I'd like to find out because that would be good.
Yeah, the name of the software is called Jack Trip Software. And
Oh,
if we wanted to get you hooked up with that, I would head you toward my friend Sarah Weaver, who's a specialist in this kind of real-time playing from remote locations.
well, maybe if you wanted to have after we get off of this thing, if you could send me her information, just
Be
and I could
happy to.
maybe have a talk with her. I'd love to do that.
Yeah, no, it's technical. There's no question about it. It's technical. But once you get it set up, it's pretty exciting.
Well, so I've got about three more questions for you, little ones.
Okay, okay.
Okay, one, I'm just always curious about everybody's. Oh, do you have any children? That's one. That's four
No,
questions.
no, no, I do
I
not.
didn't
No,
think you did.
no.
But anyway, that's uh, I just like to find out about people's spiritual and quote religious upbringings. And kind of what were your parents? Also about your parents. We didn't talk about your parents. Were you an only child? Did you have
No,
other
no, no. I have two brothers,
siblings?
two older brothers.
Two older brothers.
Hmm.
And what do they do?
Uh, my oldest brother's a lawyer, and my middle middle brother um, is. Geez, I wish I could even explain what Charlie does. He's like an IT specialist that has a small company that designs and retools uh, uh, all the details of oil refinery control rooms,
Oh,
all the sensory information that has to be balanced. He's a perceptual psychologist, in fact, but he does this work for oil companies.
wow, that's interesting. Now your parents are. I just get the feeling that you came from a very intellectually inclined family, not in any pejorative way, but
A family that believed in education, that's for sure. Yeah,
yeah, I can see that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And what were your parents like in that respect? What were their professions? And
Okay. My father was a summer camp director. It was his business and his profession, and summer camping, athletic summer boys camping. It was his profession, and my
So
mother ran the
sports were
business. Yeah, my mother was an accountant and ran the business.
and ran the business. And were you brought up with any? I mean, I'm not assuming that you're Jewish because Bloom, James Joyce had Molly Bloom, and I don't think she was
Yeah,
Jewish.
I was a reformed Jew, a
Yeah.
reformed Jew. Yeah, yes,
So yeah, so you like observe the holidays to some extent, the high
to
holidays,
some
and
extent, and there's no question that I really like that shofar. Yeah,
you really like that shofar. Yeah,
I
yeah,
like the shofar. Yeah, right, I
yeah.
did.
That was the part. And I liked one tune that Ain't Kellahano could swing. And negotiate. I kept hearing that, and and it was funny, I mean, I was a Hebrew school dropout, which we won't go into the reasons for that, but um, I just didn't like all these children dying through the Bible. But anyway, I they taught us go down Moses, and I remember feeling a deep connection to something in that song. Go down, way down in Egypt's land. And I said, oh, that's good. And I realized later that was the blues. There's like a blues scale in that phrase.
No, there's a very strong connection between Jewish melody and blues, no question about it.
Yeah, I said that was, somebody asked me about my earliest musical recollections, and I had quite a few because my parents being musicians and everything. But as far as ecclesiastical music was concerned, that song grabbed me. And in your subsequent life, have you? I mean, like musicians, we, tend to be, grab onto. As a friend of mine said, you musicians, you love to shop in the spiritual supermarket, don't you? And I said, well, I wouldn't put it that way. I think we're searching people as a rule, and we're not really complacent, and we like to feel a connection because the music has such a strong spiritual aspect to it that we're looking in our different ways. So I wouldn't put it that way, but could you talk a little bit about your own spiritual quest?
Well, um, my meditative practice for quite a while has I've studied Tai Chi. I've been a Tai Chi player, and since the very beginning of the pandemic, for about 5 years, I've been a student of Qigong, and I take that very seriously for my mental well-being,
Yeah,
as well as my physical well-being.
yeah.
So
Well,
I
so
found
you,
I
so
found
you,
something commensurate in those practices that helps me. Yeah, that does help me.
that's great.
Hmm.
So you'll no longer need my assistance to get to your hotel.
No, I don't think so.
Do you remember that?
I have vague memory, vague
We
memory.
were in Ottawa together at the
Oh, wow.
festival there, and there was a little jam session afterwards. And you were so nice when you asked me. I mean, the hotel and the club were like virtually across the street from each other. And you said, Bob, would you mind, just walking me across to the hotel?
Oh
And I,
my.
of course, didn't mind. You know, and then that's
You
what
were
I said, oh, she is small. I mean, physically, because I said,
you were
I,
very you're very kind, Bob, that you did that. I don't remember, but thank you very much.
oh yeah, I mean, there was no innuendo involved in it or anything. I said, isn't that nice? She doesn't, but I thought it was funny because we weren't in St. Louis. This was Ottawa, and I was thinking, well, things could be dangerous anywhere. She's right, and
Probably was around that time George Coleman. I remember walking me around New York. Boy, he was. I remember him telling how to take care of yourself. He was very concerned.
yeah, yeah, how to take care of yourself in New York. Just walk around with George Coleman. They're
Right,
gonna bother you with
right.
that. I mean, it's like having a Mack truck or a Sherman tank walking around with George. And
Absolutely, absolutely.
it was
We're having, which
this
was
is
very, very nice. So thank you so much for making this happen, and it's nice to talk with you.
yes, nice to talk with you too. And Brian Dennehy, is he still with us?
No, sadly, early part of the pandemic, he passed away. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. Uh,
yeah, he was a wonderful actor.
he was and a very dear friend, and
Yeah.
we miss him a lot. We really do.
So I think we pretty much covered just about everything. So I'd like to thanks very much, Jane Ira Bloom,
Thank you, Bob. It's been fun talking.
for gracing us today with your presence. It's been wonderful. And oh, do you have any current plans as far as where you're playing or anything we want to tell people about? Or
Well, coming up this spring, I play at this lovely acoustic space in Brooklyn called the Soapbox Gallery. And I'll be there with my trio with Mark Elias and Matt Wilson on drums
oh,
on
good.
Sunday, April 6th. Nice, like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We're going to play a beautiful acoustic concert there. No, all unplugged, Bob. No mics, no nothing.
Ah, yeah, that sounds good.
And they do a nice job. They also video it so it can be streamed so people can also see it online and stuff. But that's a nice concert to look forward to.
And what's the date of that again?
Sunday, April 6th.
Sunday, April 6th.
It's a little ways away, but it'll be a nice one.
Well, once again, it's been wonderful to have you here, and thank you.
Thank you,
And
Bob.
we'd like to remind you, people watching us, that it really helps if you give us a like and subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything to subscribe, but it helps us more than you might realize. And I'd like to thank Jessy Kaiser for her help in getting this all organized and putting this together. And we will see you next time on The Real Side.